Welcome to week 3 of SWK 724 in the summer of 2021. This screencast is on the stages of Latinx migration. My name is Dr. Yvonne Ruiz, and I am the professor for the course. So for Latinx immigrants who are coming to the U.S., especially those in the past decade or so, it is very useful information to have the stages of migration framework. And social workers need to know that Latino immigrants, especially unauthorized individuals and families, represent a vulnerable population. They're often marginalized, stigmatized, and exist in the shadows of U.S. society. They are often fleeing poverty, community violence, gang violence, various types of oppression, and civil and political unrest in their home countries. They're seeking basic human needs, safety, economic opportunities to make a living wage, educational opportunities, especially for their children. Many immigrants sacrifice the lives in their home country specifically to give their children a better life. And the hardships that they encounter throughout the immigration journey, throughout the stages, significantly impact on their mental health, on their well-being, on their quality of life. Many experience anxiety and depression because of their pre-migration experiences and the trauma that they've experienced. So a trauma-informed lens is very useful when working with this population. So working with immigrants, especially unauthorized immigrants, is aligned with our NASW Code of Ethics and Values, specifically in the way that social workers advocate for and serve vulnerable and marginalized populations. We're a helping profession, and we aim to improve the functioning and the well-being of our clients. And number 2, enhancing the well-being and helping meet the basic human needs and human rights of all people, especially in this current environment where there's so much anti-immigration sentiment, so much racism and discrimination that we're encountering, and active hate crimes that are being perpetrated throughout the U.S. And number 3, we are called upon to engage in culturally competent, or if you prefer, culturally responsive services for immigrants and refugees. So the process of immigration really embraces and consists of a very broad context. So the social context for immigrant individuals and families includes pre-migration experiences from the past, what they've experienced in their home countries, and it also includes the transition or the journey that they've experienced between their home country and their arrival in the U.S. And then the post-migration or the settlement stage, the way that immigrants live their lives in the U.S., the access to resources and services that are available to them. So it's also important to know that education on and services to Latinx immigrants really focuses on the post-migration stage, and there's less attention given to the pre-migration and the transitional journey that the individual or the family has experienced. But these are just as important as looking at their lives in the United States. So, therefore, the immigration context is conceptualized as a process, and a process that progresses from the decision that the individual makes to leave their home country, the preparations that they make, the journey of how they get to the U.S., and then the process of settling into a life in the United States, and how they adapt and how they're able to exist once they've arrived in the U.S. So here are the 3 stages of migration. One is the pre-migration, life in the home country. 2 is the migration, the transitional journey from the home country to the United States. And the post-migration, settling into life in the U.S. This is a very helpful framework. Let's take a closer look at the pre-migration stage. So the immigration process occurs in the home country. It includes how the decision is made. It includes who was involved in making that decision. It involves the resources that one has in their home country and how they mobilize to actually make the move and undertake the journey to the home country. What is the motivation, or is the journey necessary? So it's helpful to know that as part of the assessment that you make, part of the intake when you're working with immigrants and or refugees. So is the motivation seeking opportunities for employment, education, seeking more human rights to live the life the way you want to live it? Who is left behind? Who are important family members that have an impact on the separation and leaving your home country? For example, sometimes husbands leave their wives, sometimes you leave your parents or grandparents or other extended family members who are important. And along with the family, you're leaving behind a community. And on the other side of that, who are you meeting in the U.S.? Are you seeking a reunion with your family members in the U.S. or other loved ones? Or are you fleeing from poverty, unemployment, violence, or other threats of harm or natural disasters? So understanding the prevalence of traumatic events as well as loss and grief that immigrants experience in their home country is critical to better assessing and addressing Latino immigrants' clients' needs. It's an important part of the process of migration. The second stage of the model is the actual migration stage. It's the journey. And how one gets from one's home country to the U.S. may be comfortable. It may be, a short plane ride or a longer plane ride, maybe a bus ride, or it may be a perilous, risky trip across the U.S. border. So having a sense of how one arrives is important because so many experience trauma, loss, fear, harassment, all sorts of experiences before arriving in the U.S. Some individuals struggle for years to save enough money to make the journey. Some immigrants are separated from their families and can't find their loved ones once they arrive in the U.S. That's also part of the migration stage. So understanding the hardships or how one prepared for the journey and then took those first steps is also an important part of the process. As well as where did one live? Who did one live with? What geographic area? How similar is the geographic area to the community they left behind in their home country? Were there comfortable living conditions? How many places have they lived before making the decision to settle in the U.S.? All of these questions are part of understanding the migration process. And here we reach the settlement stage, the post-migration stage. And this is where the individual and the family members are learning to adapt to the U.S., are learning what kinds of resources they may need, what kinds of opportunities are available to them, how they're going to live their life in this new place. And they need to adapt often in situations that are filled with adversity. They may be separated from their family and loved ones. They may be doing without in order to send money back home. They may be struggling to find employment or educational opportunities and so forth. So there are different kinds of aspects to this, right? There's the emotional, psychological aspect, there's the physical aspect, and then there's just getting by, making a living, supporting oneself, and finding, basic shelter, food, etc. And then cultural and language barriers can interfere with the types of opportunities you have for education, for employment, and the types of social experiences that you have. Obviously, if one is bilingual and speaks English, that is a tremendous asset in being able to settle and build your life. And then again, access not only to employment and education, but housing, medical treatment, as well as social opportunities. And then there's the transitional immigrant experience. And as we know, transnational immigrants maintain close ties to their home country. And I wanted to add a slide here because we've been talking about a lot of difficulties and a lot of problems and looking at a deficit through a deficit lens. But I also want to emphasize that so many immigrants are tremendously resilient. They draw upon strengths, they draw upon their attributes of determination, they build upon protective factors such as familismo, other types of social support, as well as pride in their ethnic identity. So the immigration journey may be difficult, it may be trying, and it may have an impact on one's mental health and well-being. At the same time, many immigrants are able to manage and cope with the adversities they face because of their resiliency. And making the decision to leave one's home country is usually not an easy decision. So there is already a lot of strength and a lot of emotion and determination behind that. So for us as social workers, knowing the status of migration, having a sense of what the immigration process may be, and then learning from your client what has been their personal experiences and how they've drawn upon their own abilities, ways of coping, and social supports and resiliency is another piece of our social work assessment. And these can help to understand what types of treatment someone may need, what types of services will be helpful, and how we can better advocate and engage with our Latinx clients. This is the end of this screencast. Thank you for listening this far.